Welcome on into the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steven. Hold off, wait up, don't go fast forwarding to your team yet. First off, maybe this will catch your attention. The main point of this mock draft is not necessarily the player that goes to your team. As with every mock draft, it's about the conversation surrounding them. The reason for that, especially in this mock draft, why I need you to know that, is that what we're trying to do here is look at the players' ceilings and floors, and I didn't do any trades in this to help to keep it going, but I wanted to push everything to the max as far as I could for the most part for players. And some of those players that I specifically wanted to push out of the first round for reasons were like Jade Barron, somebody who, I love top 10 kind of guy. I have him going up there a lot of the time. But players like him oftentimes at least go later in the first round and often enough go in the second round. So there is far from any kind of guarantee that he'll be a top 10, 15 player in this draft. Now, I think in this draft, more than most any other draft, at least in the few drafts that I've done, you can throw away positional value. It's just really not too important for the picks in this draft. But also other players, Gray Zabel, someone who I will be surprised if he doesn't go in the first round, but also I won't be completely shocked. Kelvin Banks, some people think that he's more of a second round guy than a first round guy, so maybe the perfect storm happens. He doesn't go in the first round. I also want to look at Tedroll McMillan not going in the top 15. Jahad Campbell had shoulder surgery. Will that be something that holds him back in the draft? Tyler Warren is a tight end. He may not be the number one tight end, however. That's possible according to some opinions out there. Same thing with Ashton Jeanty. He's a running back. He may not be the number one running back taken off of the board. I'm not saying all this stuff is a high possibility chance, but what I am saying is we're going to look at some ceilings, we're going to look at some floors, and in some interesting cases, we're going to see some oddities that we don't expect to see on draft day, but could happen, not only by my opinion, but by the opinions of people who've been doing this for much longer and are connected to the NFL. So let's get that moving here. The first three picks of this draft, we're just going to kind of fly through this. So first of all, we're going to go with Cam Ward to Tennessee. At this point, that just kind of seems to be the floor for him. It really doesn't seem like he's getting past pick 1 right now. And pick 2, we're going to have the Cleveland Browns also going quarterback. So we're going to say this is the ceiling for Shedeur Sanders, I suppose. Also, just trying to get the quarterbacks out of the way. We'll have a little bit of conversation about this pick in a short bit, but I'm just kind of getting through these first three picks, and we'll talk about some potential ceilings as well. But we also are looking at a case where maybe Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, maybe their floor isn't pick 4, maybe it's actually pick 5. And the way that happens is you get a desperate team like the New York Giants having both of their quarterback prospects taken in front of them and reaching. Now, I will say this is going to be one of a few instances where ultimately I think it's way more likely that the New York Giants would be trading back in order to make this draft pick, picking up some capital prior to doing so. However, there would be a case where this is going to be the ceiling because maybe the only teams that are actually trying to come up here are teams that are behind pick 9, we'll say, and maybe they have some fear that New Orleans would take Jackson Dart if he was there, and they don't want to go all the way down to their 4th quarterback on their board. That's how you get to something like this happening. Another interesting circumstance that I've actually done in a mock draft, and I'm sure everybody just loved it, was Ashton Jeanty going at pick 2 here. That's, to me, his actual ceiling. It would be a surprise, but it wouldn't be one where I would absolutely drop my draw completely. And the reason, in part, has to do with something that we know about the opinion of Cleveland to one of these top 2 players that we expect to be taken in the top 3 really of this draft right now in Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter. First of all, though, let's just say Abdul Carter. How might Cleveland say we now want to go with Ashton Jeanty over Abdul Carter? Maybe they say, they don't have the worst edge rush room in the world, so maybe they say that's not really an area we need to fix up, and so we're looking at our next, we just have somebody higher up on our board, I guess, than edge rusher for that purpose. Possible, or maybe they want to draft for need instead of a best player available in that circumstance, even if they do have Abdul Carter as their best player available. The other thing would be if they like Travis Hunter a lot, that's okay. But the question would be, how do you then say, okay, so that's why we don't go edge. but now we go Travis Hunter, right? Or do we actually go Ashton Jeanty? Well, we do know that the Cleveland Browns at least did view, as of the time of the Combine, Travis Hunter as a wide receiver. And I think most people that I have seen, and myself as well, think that although very good wide receiver, the best wide receiver in this class, still not like a Malik Neighbors or any of those top 3 wide receivers in last year's class, or at least not like, I would say all 3 of them. Not a necessarily number 2 pick in a draft type of prospect as a receiver. And if you were to isolate his receiver work, I would have Ashton Jeanty over him, not including any of his duality. And I think if you're viewing him as a receiver, as a team, there is a higher chance that you say, well, we don't really see him as a 2 sides of the field guy, at least not for more than if the other team's throwing a Hail Mary to win at the end of the game, like they used to do with Randy Moss. You know, you throw him out there as one of the many, many guys out by the goal line because of his ball skills to just help to attack that ball and make sure that the other team doesn't come down with it. And that's not going to be something that I would say would push Travis Hunter ahead of Ashton Jeanty if that's how I was viewing him as a player. That's not how I view him as a player. Travis Hunter's my number 1 player in this draft, but that's how you get to Cleveland taking Ashton Jeanty. All right, so the next 2 picks are going to be the next 2 highest players on this board. I do think that New England definitely should, in this circumstance, in a circumstance where either one of these 2 are available, be looking at trading back. I really don't care which order these 2 go in here. We're going to go New England. Let's just go with, I think, the consensus and have New England go Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter going to Jacksonville here. Sure. Doesn't matter. I also have to say offensive line, number 1, offensive lineman, number 1 off the board here, pick 4. Wide receiver, number 1 off the board, pick 4. The ceilings have been engaged for those positions as well, assuming that we probably don't see 3 quarterbacks at the top of the draft here. So all of that, positions of need here for New England, and in some people's eyes, positions of the talent also meeting the need, or trading backwards would maybe be the better option here for New England if they're in this position. That's to bring us on to pick 6 with Las Vegas. Does it have to be Tetairoa McMillan that had that wide receiver 1 ceiling already engaged? It doesn't. It could be Matthew Golden here. It could be Matthew Golden earlier. That's the only wide receiver I would say that people legitimately think would be a potential top 12 guy. But regardless of that, we're just going to go a different route here for Las Vegas. We're going to look at a ceiling for a guy who once this was like almost the regular spot or his floor in Will Johnson, cornerback of Michigan, going here to Las Vegas. So bring us on to pick 7, New York Jets. I think this is where the tight end number 1 ceiling has been engaged. Once again, I'm saying tight end number 1 because, well, specifically in this scenario, we are not going to have the typical tight end 1 be the tight end 1, but some people do tend to think that Colston Loveland is a better tight end than Tyler Bourne. That's not, it's maybe a 20% opinion out there or something like that. It's not the primary opinion of people, but it is one that exists, and all it takes is one team to think it for that to happen. So that's why I say tight end number 1 ceiling begins here with the New York Jets. However, I'm going to have the Jets go for a ceiling on Shamar Stewart. The NFL could definitely view Shamar Stewart very highly and draft him even higher than they view him, just because that's sometimes how the NFL operates. These guys are the guys who are supposed to take the tools and turn them into weapons. So that's the thought with Shamar Stewart, is he's got all the tools. We just need to coach him up, and then he'll be one of the best players in this draft. That brings us on to pick 8, Carolina Panthers on the clock. A lot of times Jalen Walker is the pick here. It would make some sense. I don't think this is the ceiling for Jalen Walker, and I also don't think it's the floor, and I'm more interested in exploring the floor. I just redid my original version of this mock draft because it really, really seems like Jalen Walker's floor is higher than not than I thought, but higher than I did in this mock draft. I pushed it maybe too far in this mock draft based on just even more of what's coming out about how the league views Jalen Walker. Here at pick 8, we are going to explore the ceiling of Malachi Starks, another player that the NFL is absolutely in love with, apparently behind the scenes. So Carolina absolutely has a need for safety, and maybe they just like Malachi Starks more. This is going to be my ceiling for Malachi Starks here at pick 8. Pick 9, we've got New Orleans, and I think we've probably reached the floor here for a guy like Mason Graham. And even if New Orleans is not the team that's taking Mason Graham, I think, by pick 8, by pick 9 here, the teams like San Francisco especially, and other teams potentially, would be offering to move up here to draft Mason Graham. At pick 10, we've got Chicago Bears on the clock. This is not Ashton Jeanty's floor or Tyler Warren's floor, two players that will often draft, or mock, I should say, to Chicago. We are approaching the floor of the first offensive lineman being taken off the board, which I still think is a possibility for Chicago at this point in the draft. But I think that we've already passed the ceiling of a guy like Mike Green here. So we are going to have Mike Green going ahead of even Jalen Walker, James Pierce, some of these guys. I would say pick 8, pick 7 really is probably the ceiling for a guy like Mike Green. But I'm going to say the realistic ceiling here would be about pick 10 for Mike Green. Just to give you an idea of where my logic was at this point in terms of these edge rushers, I'm thinking ahead and what I want to do and some ceilings and floors that I want to explore. And when it came to guys like Donovan Ezaraku, Michael Williams, Nick Skelton, Landon Jackson, I suppose, Braden Swinson is a guy who has a ceiling. So Braden Swinson, different conversation. Nick Skelton, Jackson, Michael, Donovan Ezaraku. Those are all floors that I'm not really going to explore because it's going to go in the second round, and we're not going to go into the second round. But those are all guys that I was doing my best to just push off instead of looking at their ceilings or anything like that. However, I did keep them in mind to potentially take at some different points in this draft. It just, once again, we're pushing things to extremes, and they just didn't quite work out here. But James Pierce was a guy who I oftentimes don't have him going in the first round. That seems to be more and more so what's going to happen. But I do want to explore how high maybe he could still go if a team were to take a chance on him, as well as Princely Umanmielen, Braden Swinson, and Josiah Stewart were definitely guys who, as we get later on into this draft, I'm keeping in mind. And one of them I had originally going pretty high up, so I will let you know about that. But for now, San Francisco on the clock, and even if it's not San Francisco here, even if they traded up to pick 9, right here, or pick 13 is about the floor for the first offensive lineman going off the board. We haven't had any of our offensive linemen go yet. It's still a full room, and there's a couple of guys who definitely could be going top 10. So with pick 11, we are going to go with what I'm going to call the realistic floor here for Will Campbell at pick 11, or at least, once again, the offensive lineman number 1 being taken. It could be Armand Membu here as well. At pick 12, we've got Dallas on the board, and I would say that we've just passed the ceiling for the defensive linemen when we look at those guys. The second defensive lineman off the board, that's Kenneth Walker, Walter Nolan, Derek Harmon. And in all reality, Derek Harmon, I think, has just as much of a likelihood of being taken higher than Walter Nolan or Kenneth Grant as one of them getting taken higher than him. I really view this as a trio that I have no clue exactly what order they're going to end up getting taken off the board. I do think they're all going to go top 25, and I won't be surprised if they're starting to go at this point. Once again, the ceiling, I think about pick 11, technically a little bit higher than that even, but we're not going to explore that in this mock draft. It's actually going to be more so pushing these guys back, looking at their floors. We're not going to quite get to their floor, though, but we're going to get to where I think that their floors are, which might not quite align with reality. All that said, I am more interested in exploring a different route, which I teased earlier on in this mock draft, and that would be the possibility of Omarion Hampton going higher than Ashton Jeanty. And how that happens is, of course, a team likes Omarion Hampton more than Ashton Jeanty, and Ashton Jeanty falls, I suppose, but more so, we just need the first team to take a running back, liking Omarion Hampton more. And even Chris Sims says that he thinks that there almost surely are going to be some teams around the league who are going to be a little bit more leaning in the direction of Omarion Hampton over Ashton Jeanty. I don't think Omarion Hampton goes ahead of Ashton Jeanty, but I won't be surprised if there's 2, 3, 4 teams who like Omarion Hampton more than Ashton Jeanty. That's a possibility. So this is going to be one of those scenarios where we see that happen here with Dallas. Omarion Hampton ceiling at pick 12. That's going to bring us on to the Miami Dolphins at pick 13. I don't have tackle as a specific immediate need for Miami. this script, this whole video was getting in the works, was planned prior to Terrion Armstrong leaving. However, they did draft Patrick Paul last year, and Patrick Paul was somebody who I liked more than Tyler Guyton. Now, I had him pretty much back-to-back in my rankings, but liked him more than Tyler Guyton. They both performed relatively equally last year as project type of guys with really high ceilings, and I'm going to try to go as high as I can on a guy like Josh Connerly as well here. So this would be a spot where I could say the ceiling for Josh Connerly begins right about here at pick 13. But the reason that I bring him up and say that ceiling's there really comes from Mike Tice, ex-NFL coach. And he was recently on his son's podcast, which is his son works for Yahoo Sports, Nate Tice. Go check his stuff out if you've never seen it. And it's a really good episode between the two of them. And Nate gave his dad scouting tape to watch for, I don't know what it was, 8, 10, 12 prospects or so. Not all of them. And, he's doing this for entertainment value and everything, so it's not like Mike was putting his everything into this, but he obviously took the assignment seriously, wrote down notes, and came to an order, and he actually had Josh Connerly Jr. as his number 1 offensive lineman in this class, and he was in the NFL as an NFL coach, so we don't want to ignore the possibility that the NFL could be higher on Josh Connerly than we expect him to be. At least some teams could be. That said, I'm going to take a pick that I would also be very surprised by if this were to happen, and that is going to be safety Nick Emmanwori. And the reason behind this being a possibility here is that I just can't think that you could count out head coach Mike McDaniel being absolutely infatuated with a guy who had a perfect RAS, that's relative athletic score. We know that he loves the speed of players, etc. So Nick Emmanwori could just be the type of guy that strikes his fancy. They need safety very heavily. Malachi Stark's already off the board in this situation, but either way, we're going to call this Nick Emmanwori's ceiling, probably absolute ceiling here at pick 13. And as a heads up, they did have a top 30 visit with Nick Emmanwori, so we know that they have some interest in him. We don't even have to speculate on that. That's going to bring us on to pick 14, Colston Loveland. After this, we're going to take a quick reevaluation of what the board looks like, some of the floors and ceilings that we are trying to keep in mind where I was at while I was creating this. But for this pick, we want to, once again, explore something that we don't really expect to happen. We do expect that there's a pretty decent chance they'll go tight end, especially if Tyler Warren's available here. But Colston Loveland, I think his ceiling is probably about here. But to be perfectly honest, this doesn't have to be his absolute ceiling. We know that some teams will probably like Colston Loveland more than Tyler Warren. Indianapolis has showed more interest in a Colston Loveland type tight end with some of the tight ends that they've drafted in recent years, more of a higher ceiling receiving type of tight end. I think Colston Loveland does provide that over Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren had a lot of manufactured work in college, which could be spun as a positive or a negative, either way. And depending on how you spin that, might change how you have these tight ends ranked. So let's bring us on to, before we get to pick 15, have we hit the floor of Ashton Jeanty? I don't think so, not yet. The fun thing about the running back position is if both of them, either one of them, get past pick 12, who's going to take a running back? I don't think Miami's about to in the first round. I don't think Indianapolis, Atlanta, Arizona, Cincinnati's a team. They could be a dark horse running back pick, but Seattle, I doubt it. Tampa Bay, I doubt it. It's not until pick 20 that you really start to get back into that. Of course, somebody could trade up for one, but that's how these types of slides can happen. And so I don't think we've hit the floor of Jeanty because I don't think that if he doesn't go at that pick, there could be a slide that occurs. Have we hit the floor for the first wide receiver not named Travis Hunter taken off of the board? No, I don't think so. We could easily be seeing them slip. Have we hit the floor for a guy that I love in Jihad Campbell? No, I don't think so. Not yet. Especially because of that shoulder surgery that he had. Have we hit the floor for Armand Membu? I think that we're getting there. Have we hit the floor for Jalen Walker? I would say ditto. I think we're getting there. But about halfway through this draft, pick 1, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, no trades here. Jackson Dart to New York, Abdul Carter to New England, Travis Hunter to Jacksonville, Will Johnson, Las Vegas, Shamar Stewart to Jets, Malachi Starks to Carolina, Mason Graham, New Orleans, Mike Green to Chicago, Will Campbell to San Francisco, Omarion Hampton to Dallas, Nick Emanwari to the Dolphins, and Colson Loveland to Indianapolis. That's going to bring us on to pick 15, Atlanta Falcons on the clock. And who are you going to take? I would say this starts to be the floor for Jalen Walker, but I told you I really wanted to explore the ceiling for a guy like James Pierce. And could you draft James Pierce over Jalen Walker based on talent alone? I would say, yeah, you could. Depends exactly what you're looking for, but I mean, if you're looking for an edge rusher with juice, it's tough to get too much better than James Pierce. So that's what Atlanta's going to do in this scenario. I have my reservations about James Pierce this high, but just saying, it's possible. That's, I think, roughly the ceiling given the off-field concerns for James Pierce, which are probably going to take him out of the first round. Pick 16, I think we have met that floor here for Jalen Walker. Based on everything coming out, avalanche of just every corner of the internet saying Jalen Walker, NFL loves him, probably going top 10. Here we go. Pick 16. Arizona says, well, we'll take them. They have some needs there along the front, and they can get versatile there. They can get a little bit creative with them. So I think that they could be the ones to pull the trigger. I'm not going to say it's the absolute floor because I don't think it is. I had them go much later than the original version of this, but it just seems like truly he's not making it out of, I would say, the top 15, really. That's bringing us on to pick 17 with the Cincinnati Bengals. For this pick, we haven't reached quite the floor for some of those other guys, so I'm looking for ceilings, and I'm like Tyler Booker, or they have him listed as a tackle here, but he's a guard at the next level, and was a guard for the most part in college, is Donovan Jackson. And I thought between the two of them, if I'm trying to push the seams here, Donovan Jackson is the guy who I think has the higher ceiling and probably the lower floor just based on testing, although I'm not as concerned as I was about Tyler Booker's testing due to a metric that I created that came out okay for Tyler Booker. So we're just going to go Donovan Jackson for Cincinnati. Actually, part of the reason for that decision has to do with, I forgot about this because this sets up my next conversation here for Seattle not taking Tyler Booker, is that both of them not really a fit for Tyler Booker in terms of scheme. That is going to bring us on to pick 18, and we are not going to be drafting Tyler Booker here because of the scheme of Seattle. I think that's a terrible fit. But as the floor arrived for a guy like Tyler Warren, I think Seattle taking a tight end won't be a surprise. Or how about Armand Membu? I said we were getting close to that floor for Armand Membu, and the reason that this really works nicely for Seattle is because this is a team who seems hesitant to take interior offensive line this high in the draft based on prior remarks that they've made about their views of interior offensive linemen. Well, Armand Membu gives you that excuse of, no, I'm drafting a tackle who just might happen to play guard for a few years, or he might push one of my other tackles into the guard position, something like that, but I'm going to get a best 5 here instead of like I'm getting specifically, I mean, especially a guy like Booker could only play guard. You can't put Booker out at tackle. So Armand Membu gives you some of that flexibility and gives you the ability to mentally get past whatever issue it is that you have against interior offensive linemen in the first round. That brings us on to pick 19 for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And to me, this is like the worst kept secret in the NFL. If Jahad Campbell is still here on the board at pick 19, they're going to take him. I can't spell his name. I mean, I know how to spell it, but I screwed up so many times there. Jahad Campbell going to Tampa Bay, and they are apparently infatuated with him, love him. I think that news is from prior to his shoulder surgery. So does that shoulder surgery and the timeline of that recovery, the fact that it's going to push back his NFL career by a little bit. He's not going to have the ability in the offseason to really get up to speed as much as other guys will. So is that something that takes them off of him? Potentially. So I'm not going to call this the absolute floor for Jahad Campbell, but without that surgery, I think it was. Would be shocked if that takes him out of the first round, though. But this is, for me, the floor, unless I really hear strong news about concern about that shoulder injury. And if you see Jihad Gamble available in the second round, then you know that shoulder surgery pushed him out. That's to bring us on to pick 20 here, and I think we have reached the floor for Ashton Jeanty. And maybe this is not the absolute floor, but pick 21, pick 22, that's got to be the floor for Ashton Jeanty. Would be shocked if he were to make it past those two, or somebody not trading up for him at this point, whatever the case. So Denver, pretty easy. Ashton Jeanty, we're going to make that happen. Pick 21. Pittsburgh, lots of running backs and wide receivers are littering their list of players that they've been visiting with all off season. Maybe this is the running back three's ceiling when we look at the running back class. I don't think we're quite there for the floors on wide receivers. There are some wide receivers that I think right about now are kicking in as seeing their ceiling, and we'll talk about that with pick 22. But for pick 21, let's look at the running backs. Cam Scatterbo, also next up on my running back list. However, I don't think that the NFL is quite going to be drafting him this high. I don't think he's even a second, maybe late second round is about it for me. I will be surprised. I will be shocked if he goes in the first round. I would be surprised if he went early second round, and I kind of anticipate the likelihood that he'll be taken in the third round. So, what running back ceilings are engaged here that the NFL might have more interest in? Well, I think Travion Henderson and Quinshawn Judkins are the two from Ohio State that the NFL could see this high up in the draft. I have been talked about a little bit the ceiling for Josh Connerly. I'm going to say I think that this is about the ceiling for Josh Connerly, and this has less to do with Pittsburgh themselves drafting Josh Connerly. Not that I don't think that that's possible. If I didn't think that was possible, I wouldn't make the pick. However, I would say more likely even than Pittsburgh making this choice would be a team drafting, trading up for him right around this area of the draft. So we're going to go Josh Connerly to Pittsburgh here. Third-year tackle. They're probably not going to be looking to replace him in the first round, maybe in the third round. They're looking at some guys that they'd be interested in bringing in just in case Braxton doesn't get better at left tackle or right tackle, however they decide to end up shaking things up on that offensive line. But for me, it's possible that they would do a third tackle in a row in the first round, 3 years in a row. It would be pretty shocking, though. Maybe not even shocking. It would be pretty surprising. Pick 22, Los Angeles Chargers. Like I said, at pick 21, I think we've entered the range for the ceiling of several running backs. Talked about those guys and several receivers. And for the ceilings of receivers, I'm not talking about like any of these guys' ceilings. Obviously not. We know that we're probably closer to their floors than there's some of their ceilings at this point in time. However, I am talking about a guy like Alec Iomanner. I personally see him more as a third rounder, but I'm low on him compared to some people, and some people love him, and I could see even a team like the Green Bay Packers loving him more than guys who I think that maybe they would take. Jaden Higgins, I'd see him as a potential first round pick. Jack Besh, I would be surprised about if he went in the first round, but I think teams will love him in the second. Jalen Royals is a guy, probably maybe not this high up. I like him a lot. Kyle Williams, we know somebody has him as their second wide receiver. Chris Sims, Trey Harris could be thought of this highly in the draft. It wouldn't be a shock if any of those wide receivers went off. That's where my list ends. Torrey Horton's a guy I'm high up on. Would be surprised if he were to go. Last week I released my wide receivers rankings video, so go check those out. But a lot of guys who I think their ceilings truly do begin right here, right around pick 20 of this draft. And most likely team up here, maybe Green Bay Packers to take him. Although, of course, their history of taking, it's been a while since they've taken a wide receiver in the first round. Nonetheless, Los Angeles Chargers, all of that said, we've still got a guy on the clock who I think we have met his floor, and that is Tyler Warren. So, Tyler Warren off of the board, and the Green Bay Packers are on the clock, and we've also met another guy who I think we're reaching his floor, Tetairoa McMillan. Green Bay Packers, if he's available, please take him, please. Despite Tetairoa McMillan possibly having some deficiencies that the Green Bay Packers wouldn't necessarily be interested in, not having some of the qualities of typical wide receivers that interest them, he also has some qualities that maybe they would find very enticing and interesting. Most notably would be the ability for him to stretch the defense, much like Christian Watson has been doing for them, who's going to be missing some time. Let's bring us on to pick 24. Vikings. Originally, I had them trading back here, but I didn't think that it ended up adding any value to doing that in a mock draft where I don't have any teams trading anyways. So we already talked. I do want to enter in one new ceiling, another running back who I think has a little bit of a lower ceiling, but for a team like Minnesota specifically, could see them liking Caleb Johnson over Trevion Henderson, Quinshon Dawkins, and could see him being a first-round pick more so. Once again, absolute ceiling I'm talking here of pick 24 to the Minnesota Vikings, or them trading back and then taking him, whatever the case. Houston's another team who could like Caleb Johnson quite a bit as well. But we are approaching not quite the absolute floors, but what I'm going to call the floors for these three guys. So I'm going to start to get them taken off of the board, because I would just be pretty surprised if they don't go somewhere in the first round. So I'm going to go with Derek Harmon. I am going to go kind of the reverse of the order that I mostly think that they'll get drafted in, but I think Derek Harmon on the consensus board has passed maybe Walter Nolan or Kenneth Grant, but I think Walter Nolan. So his stock has been rising. Does that mean NFL teams, it's risen with them? Who knows? But once again, I talked about it earlier. Like I could see any one of those three guys being the first one of them getting taken off the board. At pick 25, we've got the Houston Texans, and we're going to just follow suit here. We are going to take another one of them off the board. It's going to be Kenneth Grant. Walter Nolan's the guy who I think has the highest ceiling. I think I would be willing to take the highest out of this group by a thin margin. So we're going to push him back out of the group, and that's going to bring us on to the Los Angeles Rams here, who is the team who I originally had trading up to pick 24. And so that's where, in terms of would Houston take Kenneth Grant over Josh Simmons, I don't know. It depends probably what the medicals say mostly for Josh Simmons, and just how high up they are on Kenneth Grant or one of these interior defensive linemen if they're available. But originally, I had the Los Angeles Rams moving up and then taking Josh Simmons at pick 24. Not doing that this time, but I do think we're at the ceiling, to me, for Josh Simmons, right around the Green Bay Packers pick, actually. Around 23, I think, is the absolute ceiling for Josh Simmons. With that injury, and I just don't really think that he's going to be going higher than that, we'll say. I do think Josh Connerly's ceiling is higher than his. Let's bring us on to pick 27 for Baltimore Ravens here on the clock. And we're going to go with a pick that I have been warning you about, talking about all offseason, the fact that Carson Schwarzenegger does have a ceiling of late first round. And a report actually just came out this morning, April 7th, that Carson Schwarzenegger going to be going on a top 30 visit to Baltimore, and that there is rumors of them potentially being interested in taking him in the first round. So there we go. The Carson Schwarzenegger rumors have begun. Let's go, baby. Somebody who I have taken in the first round in some mock drafts. I never did to Baltimore, so that's very interesting. That's fun. A new player that we could take that high. I have done it to Kansas City. And I thought about swapping it to Kansas City, but I wanted to let you know about that news, I guess, for Baltimore. Let's bring us on to pick 28 for the Detroit Lions. And one has to assume that we are approaching the floor of Michael Williams, but I wouldn't be shocked if he slipped out of the first round. And the reason for that is that I think a lot of teams are looking for juice at the edge rusher position, especially once we get towards the later portion of this draft, compared to a not explosive run stuffer. The point of this draft, and something I had to remind myself, because I was really getting close to just putting Michael Williams here, because I ultimately, based on the stuff coming out of the NFL, it does seem like he's going to be a first-round pick. I just struggle to say, well, here. But yeah, Detroit Lions could definitely be a team that would like him. However, the point of this draft is not to create something that I think will happen. That really wasn't the point of this draft, and I had to keep reminding myself of that. A possible surprise wide receiver number 2 off the board, I think would make sense here to Detroit, is probably entering his ceiling, and that is going to be... Where is he? Trey Harris going to Detroit. Number 2 wide receiver off the board in this mock draft. I think we hit his ceiling right here. I just would not be shocked if he goes in the first round. He's of the guys who I think could go in the first round, he's the one who I think has the slightly highest chance to do that. That is going to bring us on to pick 29, Washington Commanders. And I don't think that any of the edge rushers are guaranteed first rounders anymore that are on the board. We can look at that room real quickly. Here's the edge rusher room. I don't think Donovan Ezraku is a guaranteed first round pick. I will say, once again, Mykel Williams, I do think very strong chance that he goes in the first round, but we're going to push it to the absolute ceiling for him, for him, and say that he does fall out of the first round. So we can take edge rusher off the board here for Washington, maybe. When we look also, though, at edge rusher, I brought this up earlier, but Braden Swinson, Princely Umanmielen, and Josiah Stewart are all guys that I wouldn't be shocked if a team's just looking to add a designated pass rusher, could be taken off the board at this point. But I don't think Washington, not that you never a bad thing to take a designated pass rusher, but I think Washington needs some more like 3-down edge rushers as well. Out of the remaining guys outside of Ezraku and I guess Mykel Williams, like between Nick Scourton, Landon Jackson, JT Tuimalau, Jack Sawyer, I think that Landon Jackson for me has the highest likelihood of also being one of the guys that could make it into the back end of the first round. With all that said, though, there is also a need at cornerback for Washington, and I want to touch on somebody who it seems like we're starting to be much more open to him going in the first round again. I've moved into that positioning. It just, like, ACLs just seem to be something that you can recover from these days, and it's just less of a concern than what, like, the injury for Benjamin Morrison was, for instance. And this is a guy, much like Benjamin Morrison, that I think, if it's not for the injury, you're talking about as a top 15 type of prospect. So, Savone Ravel going to Washington here. I think this is around his ceiling. Obviously, it could be a different one of these teams up here, but I think we're pretty much have entered his ceiling. And that's going to bring us on to pick 34, the Buffalo Bills. And now, I think they need designated pass rusher. And I'm going to go with Princely Umanmielen, the one that I have liked the most this offseason out of those guys that I mentioned here. Braden Swinson, another guy who it could be as well, really. And Donovan Ezraku, too. I mean, he brings some juice. Looking at Donovan Ezraku, I would say his ceiling's about pick 23. For me, doesn't seem to be his absolute ceiling. Obviously, some people think higher of him. I would put his absolute ceiling more closely to, like, Tampa Bay. I'll be surprised if Donovan Ezraku goes. I mean, tough to say. Cincinnati would be all not possible, or Atlanta, but I do think that there's going to be some of those other edge rusher options potentially available as well, that it would just be kind of surprising to me to see him go in top 20 would be kind of surprising. So there's all the edge rusher information that we could talk about, but Princely Umanmielen going to be a designated pass rusher here for Buffalo. Just what they need, would make enough sense. That's going to bring us on to pick 31 for Kansas City. And Kansas City, Philadelphia, this is where things get a little bit interesting at the end of this mock draft. I had gone a different route. I will also say, looking at Washington and Buffalo, no matter what, when I got to Washington, I was just like, it's going to be a cornerback and it's going to be an edge rusher for these two picks. That was really on my mind there. And so when we come to pick 31, 32, I'm kind of looking at some of these offensive linemen that it would be a shock to see, not a shock, but that would be surprising to see going in the first round. Actually, I think we only need the tackles, even though one of these guys is probably going to be a guard at the next level. So, like I said, Kelvin Banks, Gray Zabel, we're going to push them off of the board here, and we are going to have a couple of shocking picks. Now, look, maybe these guys don't go ahead of these other guys that we're pushing backwards, but that's not the point. The point is not looking at what's available and saying, why the hell would a team take Ariante Ursary over one of these guys? That's not how this mock draft is structured. This mock draft, we're trying to look at ceilings and floors, and if we look at, I think, all the way up to about pick 28 with the Detroit Lions, Ariante Ursary's ceiling was kicked in. So we're going to have Ariante Ursary going back end of the second round. I think that's possible. Going to go to Kansas City. Obviously, they have some need there in the offensive room. And I think also Pittsburgh is the first version of this mock draft that I actually had going. However, Minnesota is where Ariante Ursary is from. Kansas City had a top 30 visit with Ariante Ursary, and the next guy that I wanted to get in here, I have talked about as well as being a guy several times who could go people talk about him as potentially going late second round, and that's Marcus Mbow. And he doesn't strike me as the option that I would have gravitated towards for Philadelphia here. Going to be as a guard. On a recent video, somebody said that they're sure as hell happy that I'm not in control of the Philadelphia Eagles. And look, for some reasons, totally understand that. I wouldn't want myself in control of them either without some extensive training in some of the other aspects. But you were specifically talking about drafting. And you're somebody who's commented on my videos a lot, and I'm not going to sit there and dox you or anything, but I'm going to read off some of last year's takes and say that I'm sure as hell happy, and you should be happy that you're not in control of your own team, because they probably wouldn't have won a Super Bowl if you were making decisions. Because last year, you were telling me... and probably pretty much the rest of the world, because I was not in an island as somebody who felt that you needed some help in that secondary, and for good reason, because you know what, you end up taking two guys, but every time that I did that, you told me that the Eagles don't need a backup cornerback, and he would be at best 6th on the depth chart, or too early for, and whatever other things. You also told me, let's see, Eagles won't take cornerback till 5th round, if any, you told me. Guyton, you liked Tyler Guyton in the 1st round, which, yeah, you didn't do too well. You loved, and I did not like Tyler Guyton in the 1st round. That was just a pick that I made as a predictive pick. You said you loved Dijon to start at safety. Well, you did end up getting Dijon, so you did like that pick at least, but you thought he'd be a safety, which, yeah, some people thought he might be a safety, but... wasn't where I had him. And to add depth to the cornerback room, any cornerback in this draft would be 5th on the depth chart. You seem to think that you just had some stacked secondary when you did not. You said, in what fantasy world would Howie trade up for a cornerback that would be 5th on the depth chart once again? No way that the kid from Yale, and you said you like Worthy, but not till the 3rd round. Well, look at that. He went in the 1st round, so me taking him for you late 2nd round wasn't so bad, I guess. But in what fantasy world would Howie trade up for a cornerback? The real world is the fantasy world that he would trade up for a cornerback, because that's what he did to take Cooper DeJean in the 2nd round. The 2nd cornerback that he took, and both of them were starters, not your 5th and 6th wide cornerbacks in the room. So please get the frick off my back, because you said last week that no chance that the Eagles take a guard. Well, they're looking at guards with their top 30 picks. Marcus Mbow isn't the only guard that they looked at. Maybe they're looking at Marcus Mbow as a tackle. That's very possible. I have not been taking guard for you guys for some time now in this offseason. I just mentioned the possibility in that video because you did trade for Kenyon, bring him in. Oh, by the way, also last year, I forgot to read this one. You said that Tyler Steen would be the starting guard for you guys. Well, he wasn't. You said that again this year. Well, we'll see. Maybe. He's coming into his 3rd year. He's kind of stunk it up. I loved Tyler Steen in that draft. I thought he was a tackle, not a guard. I don't know if that's part of the reason that he's struggling, but another year, very good offensive system around him. But I will tell you, you said the coaches love him and everything. Well, you can look up. Kelsey's talked some smack about Tyler Steen and said that he's very inconsistent. So, coming in 3 years and he's still inconsistent, deep 2 years in, that's not promising stuff there. But you also drafted Trevor Keegan last year, so I liked Trevor Keegan quite a bit. So between those 3 guys, and then, of course, Landon Dickerson, I understand you've got 3 guys who might be able to be your other guard. So it could go either way. I don't know what the team feels. Maybe Tyler Steen has taken some strides, and they are going to feel comfortable with him as their starter. Could very well be, and I'll be rooting for him, okay? So calm down. But Marcus Mbow going to be to the Philadelphia Eagles here. The final pick of this draft. I'm going to put the final draft board up here, but once again, the main idea here was to look at some ceilings and floors for guys, less so than team fits and all that stuff. But there had to be at least a 1% chance of it happening for me to make the pick. So, I wasn't trying to get too crazy in terms of just throwing, a quarterback on anybody's team. A quarterback with the Kansas City Chiefs at pick 31, because I think a team could trade up and that'd be their ceiling. I wasn't about to do that. So there you go. That is it for this mock draft. Thank you very, very much for tuning on in. Take care. Have a good one. Hope you enjoy the video. Peace out.